Hi, David Ellenstein here, Artistic Director of North Coast Repertory Theater. Thank you for tuning in today to our theater conversations. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. That would help us out a lot. Thank you. Hello, it's my pleasure today to welcome my friend and colleague, Ann Wareham, who is the Artistic Director of the Laguna Playhouse, to Theater Conversations. Hi, Annie, how are you?
I'm well, David. How are you?
Well, doing okay. We're all holding up, you know, we're trying to be creative in the ways we can be creative right now.
I do love your setting. It's quite
my backyard. This is my backyard.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I like yours too. Is that your backyard behind you?
It's somebody's French backyard that's on a painting behind my couch. So.
Oh, I thought you lived in the jungle.
Yeah, so, if I go outside, then the dog makes noise and the wind chimes make noise, and you don't want any of it.
That's great. Well, I don't know. That might be fun. It might bring the impromptu nature of this alive.
There you go.
So for those of you that don't know, Annie has been artistic director at Laguna Playhouse for coming up on 10 years?
On 10 years.
10 years, yeah. But before that, you had a storied career at the Mark Taper Forum. Do you want to just tell our audience a little bit about what your position was there and how long you did it and all that stuff?
Storied career. That's one way of looking at it, isn't it? Boy.
Yeah, I meant that in a good way. Stories and happy.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I started out at the Center Theater Group, which at the time when I started out, I just out of college, and I went into the to the publicity department at the Amundsen. They were very split, the Amundsen and the Mark Taper Forum. It was two, you know, under one umbrella organization, but two very different theaters. And over the years, once Bobby Fryer left the Amundsen and Gordon took on both theaters, and we really did become one entity, Center Theater Group. And it took a long time to kind of rebrand that. But I was with Gordon Davidson for 25 years, I think, and started out as his assistant, ended up as his associate producer, and then went through the transition of the Gordon Davidson retirement and goodbye and the Michael Ritchie arrival, and spent about 3 years with Michael after Gordon left, and as an associate producer, and then came to Laguna Playhouse.
And you and I, although I knew of you for many years, I don't know if you knew of me before our association. But through you coming to Laguna, where I had worked before, and Laguna then bringing one of our productions up there, Chapati, which came to Laguna. Judith Ivey had directed it for us here, and then she was unavailable, so I actually brought the production up and sort of restaged it up at Laguna.
Yeah.
And, we sort of became closer then, got to know each other pretty well. And
nice experience all the way around.
Very wonderful, because Laguna Playhouse is a beautiful theater. It's the perfect size, and you know, always does good work. So it's one of my favorite places to not only work, but also to go and see plays. But I'm happy to say I'm going to be coming up there next season to direct a Shana Madel there, which will be great fun. And an amazing play. So jumping back a second, now that I've given our audience a little context about our connection, 25 years at the Taper. When you think about it, what 2 or 3 productions jump to your brain and go, that's when it was that's what theater's about, that was the best, that's why we do this?
So interesting, because I had different experiences at the Taper. I started in high school as an usher, and all through college as an usher. So some of the most magical, memorable experiences I have are back in those days when I was in high school and college. I think the original production of Alfred Urey's Robert Bridegroom was, you know, and when you were ushering as a student, and you had to be a student in order to be an usher, you could see the show as many times as you wanted to. And I saw that show 25 times.
Wow.
Saw Robert Bridegroom 25 times.
I've seen it 25 times, but only because I've directed it.
Yeah, well, it's so fun, isn't it? Man, and Barry Bostwick in the lead. Barry Bostwick was our lead, and it was a pretty incredible production. And yeah, so Robert Bridegroom kind of was one of the first ones for me. I remember Juno and the Paycock with Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon was, you know, you couldn't go wrong with that.
And then Stapleton.
And yeah, right.
I saw it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it was great.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And you know, some of my Amundsen years too with Bobby Fryer and that gang were pretty memorable. Those were in the days when we, you know, did productions starring Katharine Hepburn and Elizabeth Taylor, and Charlton Heston did a show every year, and Richard Thomas did a show every year, and Richard Chamberlain did shows, and it was really an incredible experience. But you know, in my Gordon Davidson years, you can't highlight that without the extraordinary experience of premiering Angels in America, which was, you know, we premiered part 1, and then we came back and premiered parts 1 and 2 and did the marathons. So that was amazing. Children of a Lesser God was an amazing time and very groundbreaking. And towards the end of Gordon's tenure, I loved Stuff Happens, the David Hare play, which was so courant at the time. You know, it had been written a year before about, you know, about how we got into the Iraq War from a British perspective. And by the time it got to us in Southern California and in America, it was a year later. And all of those things that David Hare knew were happening a year before were now coming out in the press. So every day you'd read about, you know, Condoleezza Rice, and you'd read about things that were going on in the Bush White House, but they would come to life at night, and people would say, how did you know this was going to happen? Well, the play's a year old, so
yeah,
that was pretty exciting.
Sometimes we can predict the future in the theater, even if you realize that's what we're doing.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed working with Cameron McIntosh on putting it together, and that was just a great experience to have both Cameron McIntosh and Stephen Sondheim out here working on that production, and starred Carol Burnett. That was really wonderful. It was a great.
Now, were you there when Zeffirelli was going to do the Hamlet?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because you know I was cast in that.
Oh, you were?
Yes, I was cast to play Bernardo and the Second Gravedigger.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, you remember that? Oh, it was going to be the biggest thing ever, and then.
What a big deal that was.
Yeah.
Well, it was Zeffirelli.
I know. It was our hero from Romeo and Juliet. How could we go wrong, right? Yeah. So Laguna Playhouse, 10 years now. It's amazing. So when you think about your 10 years there, what production or two stand out as like, we're doing it right? Yeah,
you know, I've loved following in the footsteps of our dear friend Andy Barnacle, who I know is a favorite at North Coast Rep, and it's been a joy to be able to work with him. He comes back and does something every year. He was in an incredible production that we did of 12 Angry Men. He was one of the stars of that, one of the 12 Angry Men, and directed by Michael Matthews. And that was a real standout production for me. Andy directed King of the Road, which was the Roger Miller musical, and we had a wonderful time doing that. I loved our production of Daddy Longlegs. That was in my first season there. It was a beautiful production. But gosh, there's so many, you know, we all do. I mean, we do 7 main stage shows a year. I've enjoyed developing our audience for Panto, for our Lithgow family Panto during the holidays, and that's become a tradition at the Playhouse. So that's been fantastic.
So Annie, were you ever a performer?
As a kid.
So what was your favorite role or?
I do, because I was a child of Los Angeles and Hollywood. I just did television commercials, and you know, somewhere along the way I was a Breck girl, and I mean nobody remembers what Breck girls were, but that was a shampoo that was very popular back in the day, and yeah, so
With the little pearl floated down in the bottle.
that's right. That's right. Yeah,
I
yeah,
remember.
you remember that. Yeah, so my dog is trying to horn in on this. Um, and you know, I
We can do
probably
a
did.
separate one for your dog. We can do a separate conversation for the
Oh,
dog
great.
later.
Okay, good. Thank you, Murphy. You get your turn. Yeah, you know, I'm sure that I did uh, kind of community theater productions when I was little, but I don't really remember. I remember being on stage. I don't really remember what I was in
Right.
back then. But I've always known that I was going to be sort of behind the camera from the moment I was interested in going into the theater. Much
Right.
to my dismay, I went into the theater.
Right. Do you have a funny story that's happened in a show that you tell because it was just
Oh,
amazing? Unbelievable?
there's a few of them, but
Well, you want to share one or two?
one of the best ones was when we were doing Neil Simon's I Ought to Be in Pictures. And it starred Tony at the taper, starred Tony Curtis and Dinah Manoff, and she was his daughter. And Joyce Van Patten played his sister, Tony's sister. And Dinah Manoff and Tony Curtis were like oil and water. They just didn't like each other, didn't get each other, weren't having a good time working together. And, you know, they kept it very professional, but they would get under each other's skin a lot. And one Saturday matinee, somebody said something or did something on stage that upset the other one. And I don't know who did what first, but they both went off stage, one stage left and one stage right. And one went out one side door of the taper and the other went out the other side door of the taper. And I got a call from our stage manager, Tammy Toon, saying, you know, our two stars have just walked out and I'm not really sure they're coming back. So we had an extremely long intermission while we all, you know, flew down to the theater. I was probably 15 minutes away. We had probably a 40-minute intermission, giving people free drinks, and they were gone. They both went to their cars and left. And so we threw understudies into costumes and got them ready to go on stage. And everybody came back into the theater. The lights went down. Joyce Van Patten was the first person on stage in the second act. And she's come to see her brother for the first time in years. And the first line out of her mouth was, wow, you've changed. and you know, it was clearly an understudy. And it clearly wasn't Tony Curtis. And the whole place exploded in laughter. And after that, the rest of the show was fine. But talk about a surreal experience.
Oh,
Yeah.
that is wild. That's wild.
Either one of them realized that the other one had left the building.
Wow. Did they come back the next day?
I think they came back that night. I think this was
God.
the second matinee, and I think they came back that night. But poor Joyce Van Patten delivering that "Wow, you've changed" line.
Yeah, and it just brought the house down, huh?
Yeah, no one could have done it better than a Van Patten. Let me tell you.
That is so wild. And what about at Laguna? Have you had any strange, fun, offbeat things occur in a show there?
You know, we have. I mean, we had kind of a horrible thing happen, but it was what reminds you of how resilient people in the theater are. When we were doing Panto a few years ago, and Carrie Fisher died. She had had a stroke. She was in the hospital. Her sister Jolie Fisher was on our stage in the Panto, playing the Wicked Queen, and she was such a trooper that I saw it on the news before I went in that morning that she'd been taken off a plane and taken to the hospital in critical condition. And when I got to the theater, Jolie had just heard, and she came in and she said, no, I'm going on. This is where I belong. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is what my sister would want me to do. And she went on and she performed. And then we threw her in an Uber and sent her to Los Angeles. And then when Carrie died, and then Debbie Reynolds died
Yeah.
within 24 hours.
Yeah.
There, we just, not only will we not ask Jolie to do that, but no one would expect that. And we wanted her to stay with her family. But we had about 3 hours notice. And we're not freeway close. And, you know, everybody knows this who's driven to Los Angeles. We're not freeway close to Los Angeles. So Becky Lithgow, who is one of the producers of the Lithgow family panto, she and her husband Chris create them and produce them, knew the part. She's a singer and a fabulous musical theater actress, and she'd you know, done plenty of casting, been in casting for it. And this is all, you know, pantos are popular music, so this was a Taylor Swift song. Sorry. And she got in an Uber, looked at the script, sang her songs in the car on the way down, went on without a rehearsal.
Wow.
Killed it.
Yeah.
And, you know, didn't miss a beat. I mean, she didn't have a rehearsal. We didn't have a put-in rehearsal. We just took 10 minutes before curtain, threw her on stage. Thank God the costume fit. But that's, I mean, that's terrifying to me. I can't imagine doing that as an actor. I mean, you're an actor. You understand that. She was fearless. Becky
Wow.
was fearless. And Jolie, bless her heart, was back at it the next
Wow.
day, you know.
That's amazing.
Oh,
Show must go on, right?
yeah.
So what are the I mean, I know we can't perform right now because we're all in lockdown, as it were, and we're hoping that it begins to loosen up a little bit. What are Laguna's plans that you could share with us now or not share with us now? Because I totally get that everything's in flux and we all have kind of contingency plans.
Yeah, everything. Plan A, a plan C, a plan W. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We're in the same boat.
Yeah. So where are you currently?
Well, we did, you know, we had already canceled the remainder of our season, which ends the end of June. And we did make the decision to not perform this summer. I think we're all taking our cues from when people are going to feel comfortable going back into the theater. And, you know, until there's widespread testing and we're on the cusp of a vaccine, I think that's a difficult conversation to have with anybody.
Right.
But our summer show was Legally Blonde, and we've now moved it to the end of next season. So, you know, it'll make its way, but it's just going to be on the back end, and it'll probably adjust what that season is. But, you know, this is our 100th anniversary season.
Wow. Wow.
So, big splashy plans.
Yeah.
So we're going to hope that we can, you know, that we can retain as many of those plans as we have, and we'll take our cues from, you know, what's going on out in the world and society and in the world of medicine. We'll take our cues from the experts.
Yeah. You know, I know you're like me in that one of your favorite things about being in this business is all the people that you get to know and the extended family that's created. And like me, you know, because I grew up in LA around show business, meeting everybody, knowing everybody. And you realize that no matter how famous somebody is, they're just a person.
That's right.
And some of the famous people, they get crazy, and some of the famous people get more human. Do you have some people that you've encountered that are famous or of notoriety that when you met them, you went, I understand why this person has succeeded because of the genuine person that they are? That surprised you in that way?
Yeah.
Mind?
Well, you know, the one that comes to mind most rapidly is Kirk Douglas. It was great to get to know him as we were, you know, building and opening the Kirk Douglas Theatre. Kirk gave his substantial gift so that we could start a campaign to open that theater. It was always Gordon's dream to have a theater like that, and being in Culver City was fantastic. And then I produced Kirk's one-man show, My Stroke of Luck, based on his book about his stroke, at the Kirk Douglas Theater. And, you know, he had had a stroke. He spent years learning how to speak again. And that man was, not only was he a star, I mean, the minute you were in a room with him, you knew why he was a major movie star.
Right.
But again, another guy who was completely fearless, got on that stage, made sure that, you know, even though he was not easy to understand, he had his speech therapist sitting in the house with me while we rehearsed. And if she couldn't understand one word, she would stop him and make him say it again, so that the audience never missed a beat. They didn't miss anything because he was so devoted to telling the story and telling it in a way that could be understood. And he did it every night, all,
Yeah.
you know, in his 90s, all by himself.
Wow. Wow.
He-
When I was young, I remember reading his biography called Ragman's Son.
yeah, yeah,
Little, I think the first line is, they call my name is Little Isser, because his real name was Isser Danielovich, if
yeah,
anybody doesn't know. And he grew up really poor in New
Right.
York with his father, who was a rag man.
yeah.
He drove cart.
Part, yeah.
Yeah, and it's an amazing book and an amazing story, and to see where he got to, because you don't realize how human people are when we kind of idealize them and make them movie stars. We
I
forget.
really enjoyed his wife, Ann, who's still alive. And again, she's 101 now.
Ah,
You know, they both lived so long. I remained friends with her, you know, outside of the theater, and spent time with the two of them. And when Kirk turned, I mean, being the daughter of a Presbyterian minister, I had to learn these things as I went along. But being a part of Gordon Davidson's life for over 30 years, I kind of became the honorary Jew. And Kirk had a bar mitzvah. I think it's in the book when he was 13, but it was a very poor version of a bar mitzvah. And so apparently when you're 70, you are a fully grown man. So at 83, he was 13 again. And he threw himself a bar mitzvah. And
wow.
year practicing the Torah, and he had a little ceremony, and it was at Wilshire Temple in Westwood, and I thought it was going to be, you know, hundreds of people coming to watch Kirk do his thing, and he was totally on, and it wasn't. There were about 50 of us. It was just family and a few friends, and he had Ann there, his wife, and Diana Douglas, his you know, former wife and the mother of his children there. And he talked about the kind of man that he was, the kind of man he wanted to be, the kind of husband he wished he had been the first time around, the kind of father he aspired to being. And talk about seeing the human side of somebody that iconic. You know, he was just a man who was still trying to get it right.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Annie, thank you for sharing this with the North Coast Rep audience and letting them get to know you a little bit. You're an awesome person, and I always enjoy every encounter that we have. And I'm looking forward to being up there next spring,
Yeah.
and hanging out not only at the wonderful Laguna Playhouse, but also in Laguna, which is so much fun just to walk around.
Well, you know, you're my favorite theater to go visit. Don't tell any of the other, you know, local resident regional theaters that, but I love coming to North Coast Rep. I love what you do. I'm always happy to see your work. It never disappoints me. So thanks for all you do.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I look forward to seeing you in person, and maybe we'll sit at the Lumberyard and have a drink.
Yeah.
Okay.
It'll be open again
It
someday.
will. It will. Thank you for doing this today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll see you soon.